Just like you and me, Joe started out on life as a baby. He lived alone in a great big cot with flowers on his pillow. And he was surrounded by lots of interesting things, all different shapes and sizes, things that kept him company and filled up his world. Some of the time, they made him very happy. And when he was happy, he smiled at them. But at other times they annoyed him, so he snarled angrily at them and smacked them. But then, when he was lonely, he would reach out his arms again and cuddle them close. He soon learned to give a name to each one and found that whichever he wanted would just appear when he shouted out for it. Time passed by. And as Joe grew up and moved from cot to playpen and then began to walk and talk, he was really and truly absolutely surrounded by all these things. He kept on meeting new ones. Wherever he went, there were more and more. Why, the whole world had been made just for him. And Joe grew even older and taller, and began to notice how jolly smart he looked. It was about then that he started noticing the shapes and colours of these things around him. And though none of them was quite as nice as he was, he decided that he liked best the ones that had the prettiest colours and the nicest shapes. And he started to ignore all the others, the dull ones and the dumpy ones, the ones that were too small and those that were too big. So he'd stand on the corner and watch them all go past. When a really nice one came along, he'd look it up and down, think to himself, that's a nice shape, or I like those colours, and whistle after it. And then, for weeks at a time, he'd make it his very own and go around with it every day, ignoring all the others, until he grew tired of it. Then he'd dump it and go after another one that seemed even better than the first. He had a good time, such a variety, and all for him. Time passed by. Now, when he was quite grown up, about 20, he decided that he'd found the one he really liked best of all. So he took it and made it his forever. And he called it Number 2. He took it home, and there they lived together day and night. It was nice to know that Number 2 was around all day, every day. It learned to do everything for him, cooking his breakfast and cleaning the place from top to bottom, all together, making him very, very happy. In the morning, he would wave goodbye and pat it on the head, knowing that while he was away at work, Number 2 would get on with the cleaning and the washing and the ironing until he was home again. And at work, everything was just as nice, a sort of home from home. There were lots of other things there, each with its own little job to do. Some of them were nice, and some were not so nice, but he was patient with the dingy ones and the dumpy ones, the scrawny ones and the scraggy ones. As long as they did their job well, opening the door for him, or fetching what he wanted, or cleaning up after him at the end of the day. So at home, or at work, Joe's life went on very well. He was happy. Even on the journey to work, he found that all the odd shapes and the dowdy colours around him didn't really disturb him too much. He could ignore the ugly ones, and there was always some nicely coloured, pretty shape for him to enjoy. Time passed by. Alas! Soon Joe began to notice that number 2 was beginning to lose its shape, and the colours started to fade. It still did all he asked of it, but it wasn't as exciting or interesting as some of these others. Wherever he went, Joe came across more and more nice new ones with pretty shapes, and the more he looked at them, the more he forgot about number 2. "I think I'll see about that new one at work," he said. "That should be fun. After all, I chose this draggy old thing in the first place. I feel like a change." Number 2 had always done all he asked, and had learned to do it all the way he liked, and had really done it all very well, and was quite tired out through taking such good care of him. "Well," said Joe, "a man can't be expected to tie himself down forever. I mean, a man's a man when all's said and done." The more he thought like this, and it showed, the more unhappy number 2 became. It started to spoil his breakfast, and didn't keep the house as tidy as before. And when Joe came home in the evening, number 2 looked more and more tired and sorry for itself. Its shape didn't look at all as nice now. Proper saggy and flabby. So Joe was really fed up. He wasn't going to sit around here for the rest of his life with that old thing. He'd have a chat with that rather nice one he'd noticed on the way to work. So next day, when he saw the pretty one, he told it how he decided to make it his forever because he liked its shape and colour and... But the nice new one just simply turned away and rushed off without even so much as an apology. It can't have understood me, he thought. Well, it must be very stupid, but supposing it had understood him. Well, anyways, that other one, that rather pretty one at work, I'll take that one. As soon as he got to work, he summoned the pretty one that made him his morning tea and told it how he decided to make it his forever because he liked its shape and colour and... It just dropped the cup on the table there and then and rushed out without so much as a "by your leave." Joe was amazed and began to panic. Perhaps they've all gone deaf. Perhaps they're all stupid. Perhaps they don't understand. So he hurried out to where lots of others were working and started to approach all the pretty ones, starting at the end of the row. But one after the other, they made excuses or didn't seem to hear him or just ignored him. Then they all got up and left. In sheer panic, he rushed out into the corridor where lots of things, all shapes and sizes, went to and fro all day, but none of them stopped when he called them. They seemed to want nothing to do with him. Joe got really angry at this and drew himself up to his full height. Now, just you listen here." But they didn't. They acted as if he wasn't even there. Every one of them treated him as, well, as if he were just some sort of object. He was shattered. "What shall I do?" he asked aloud. "What's going on? What's happened to everything? Where do I go from here?" For a long time, he went around, trying to carry on as usual, but every now and then going up to a nice shape or pretty colour. But every time, the same thing happened. Time passed by. And wherever he went, he began to notice that whenever he looked for an explanation, there was this one particular shaped thing that seemed to be hanging around. It didn't matter where he was. He couldn't remember ever having noticed it before, so for a long time he ignored it but it wouldn't go away. It was a strange sort of shape, like nothing he'd ever seen before, sort of, well, it was just really different. So one day he stopped and turned round to find out why this thing kept popping up whenever he asked himself what he was to do or what did it all mean. It just stood there, looking at him. It was much bigger than he thought. It seemed to be staring really hard at him. For the first time in his life, he began to feel very uncomfortable. He didn't feel somehow that he could just snarl at it or knock it out of the way, as he'd been used to doing. And when he tried to give it the biggest smile he could manage, it didn't seem at all impressed. It just stood there, in front of him, bigger and bigger now. He couldn't take his eyes off it. And as he looked, it seemed to be saying something. What was it saying? It wasn't clear. He couldn't quite make it out. It was so vague. So he decided to look more closely. And the closer he looked, the more he saw that it wasn't the thing itself, for all its different shape, which was speaking, but that in front of him were, well, it was as if the thing had melted in the middle, and in fact there were two objects, like one thing on top of another. Joe gasped. He couldn't believe his eyes, and yet he couldn't change what he saw. There, in front of him, was not something, but someone. And this someone looked just like him, except that the eyes were different and the face looked tired. It was a real person, but it was all beaten up and scarred, and it was tied onto a cross-shaped thing. For the first time, Joe knew that here was someone who was bigger and better than him, with a nicer shape and colour than his own, and who was looking down at him. And he felt the gaze of those eyes staring at him, seeing him, looking right through him. And he began to cry because he knew he was being looked at, and he knew that next to this big one, he was just some funny-shaped little object. But the one on the cross seemed to know what he was thinking and kept whispering the same few words, sort of half-sentences. No, learn again. Persons, created all persons, you too, not your world, created persons, because of me, learn again. And because this one had used words that he'd never heard before, Joe didn't try to run away, but stayed to listen, and asked to be told more and shown more. And then, as he listened, he began to notice that all around him some of the things had started to change. Some had grown an arm or a leg, others had an eye or a face. They weren't just things anymore, and the more that he looked at the one on the cross, the more he listened to him, the more he learnt about himself and the world, and about the one on the cross, the more the things changed. Until soon, he was surrounded by people. The things all became people, with the one on the cross right in the middle. And the one on the cross smiled at him and looked beyond him and through him and past him. Joe turned round and saw someone coming towards him. He thought he recognized... Yes, it was number 2. But it wasn't just the shape and colour that he'd chosen long ago. It had arms and legs, and a face, and eyes. It was smiling, too. And Joe saw the real shape for the first time. "Why," he shouted, "you're a person just like me." And number 2 held his hand, and together they knelt and looked at the person on the cross and smiled and said thank you, because Joe was beginning to see the real people now. And the person came to them and showed them his scars and the blood and the pain and the starting again.